Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, China has appointed a special envoy in the Horn of Africa to foster lasting stability, peace and prosperity. The shift in the communist state's long-standing policy of non-interference has raised eyebrows within the international community. Heather Lee, founder of the China-Africa consultancy firm The Dot Connector, will be joining me from Nairobi, Kenya for her take. And the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is projected to lift tens of millions of people out of poverty within the next 15 years, yet momentum appears to have fizzled. Why? I'll be asking trade governance and development specialist Ayo Aribidara, who'll be joining me from Bunjul in Gambia. Then later I'll be speaking with Maroun Kairouz, the World Economic Forum's Director of the Middle East and North Africa, about the region's 2022 economic outlook. But first, as always, let's start the show with news from here in the UK, where the topic of conversation is focused squarely on the future of embattled Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The Conservative leader faces being interviewed under caution by police after Scotland Yard said Downing Street parties crossed a threshold for a serious and flagrant breach of lockdown rules.
And what I can tell you this morning is that as a result, firstly, of the information provided by the Cabinet Office inquiry team, and secondly, my officer's own assessment, I can confirm that the Met is now investigating a number of events that took place at Downing Street and Whitehall in the last 2 years in relation to potential breaches of COVID-19 regulations. My officers have assessed several other events that appear to have taken place at Downing Street and Whitehall. On the available information, these other events are assessed as not reaching the threshold for criminal investigation.
On the 1st of December, the Prime Minister told this House, in relation to parties during lockdown, all guidance was followed completely in number 10 from that dispatch box. Yeah. On the 8th of December, looks quizzical, he said it. On the 8th of December, the Prime Minister told this House, I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged there was no party. So since he acknowledges the ministerial code applies to him, will he now resign?
No, Mr. Speaker. But you know, since he asks about COVID restrictions, let me just remind the House, and indeed remind the country, that he has been relentlessly opportunistic throughout. He has flip-flopped from one side to the other. He would have kept us in lockdown in the summer, Mr. Speaker. He would have taken us back into lockdown at Christmas, Mr. Speaker. And it's precisely because we didn't listen to Captain Hindsight that we have the fastest growing economy in the G7, Mr. Speaker. And we have got all the big calls right.
Mr. Speaker, at the heart of this matter, we have a Prime Minister who is being investigated by the police for breaking his own laws. Absolutely unprecedented. A man who demeans the office of Prime Minister. This is the latest in a rap sheet that is already a mile long. Illegally proroguing Parliament, misleading the House, decorating with dodgy cash, partying while the public suffered. Every moment he stays, he is dragging out the agony for families who are reminded of the sacrifices they made, and dragging his party further through the dirt. The public knows it, the House knows it, even his own MPs know it. Yeah. When will the Prime Minister cop on and go?
Yeah. He made the same point last week. He's wrong then, he's wrong now, and much as I enjoy cooperating him, but it is precisely because I enjoy cooperating with him so much and with all his Scottish colleagues that I have absolutely no intention of doing what he suggests.
Now to our next topic, China-Africa trade relations, which is valued at a record $240 billion US. The recent announcement that the country was appointing a special envoy in the Horn of Africa to foster lasting stability, peace and prosperity raised eyebrows within the international community, with some suggesting that the shift in the communist state's long-standing policy of non-interference was more about protecting investment interests in a region that is littered with conflict, with recent dialogue suggesting that China's economic investments are waning on the continent. What should we expect in the year ahead? Let's ask Heather Lee, founder of the China-Africa consultancy firm, The Dot Connector. Heather joins me from Nairobi in Kenya. Heather Lee, it's a pleasure to have you joining me on Channel's Business Global today. China appears to be significantly scaling back some of its planned activities on the continent. During the recent 8th Forum on the China-Africa Cooperation Ministerial meeting for agricultural assistance, climate and environment, health, peace and security, and trade promotion, trade being a key project there. The number of committed projects for each category dropped from 50% in 2018 to just 10 projects this year. What's behind this, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think, well, definitely, I don't think there's really like a sign of slowing down of Chinese investment in Africa. I think it's mostly for China to adjust its strategy to the current environment dynamic with the COVID situation and the domestic conflicts in a few countries that China has heavily invested into in the past. So I think it's more of a strategic adjustment instead of actual scaling back.
You believe that this is more strategy in relation to COVID, but then if we look at last year, China-Africa trade hit an all-time high of $254 billion US. Xi Jinping believes that can reach $300 billion over the next 3 years, but surely they would want to scale up rather than scale back, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, so of course, I definitely think that China will stick with the plan that has been proposed to reach the 300 billion goal in 3 years. So I think it's definitely not a sign of scaling back. I think it's more about just pacing itself for more like long-term collaborations and cooperations. And temporarily, it may look like it's slowing down, but I think in the long term, for sure, it will keep with the ambitious plan it has.
You're based in Nairobi, so you're really at the heart of East Africa's economic powerhouse. You've also got the Dot Connector consultancy, so you're clearly having your ear to the ground. What's your perspective, an honest perspective, of some remarks that Wang Yi recently rebuffed about alleged or so-called debt trappings? Lots of individuals are starting to get suspicious about lots of this Chinese investment in Africa, which has completely transformed some local economies. But then some say it's going to hurt Africa in the long run.
Yeah, well, this is my second visit to Kenya, and I've definitely seen it has transformed so much over the last 3 years alone. And the infrastructure, like with the help of China's projects, it has really developed very fast, and I definitely think it will provide a lot of economic opportunities and job opportunities for the local residents here. So I think it's definitely like a win-win strategy, and of course, like China traditionally has has a very strong like business mindset. It's not really just about like any political interest. It's really like about helping like the private businesses in China to like also grow and thrive in Africa, and then like provide the same kind of like like using the strength of China to support the development of Africa. So I think in that sense, like I don't really think that trap sentiments it's it's like realistic. I think like definitely like the business interest is there, and like for anything to be sustainable, it has to like benefit for both parties. So I think like continuous development in East Africa will definitely like support generally like the whole of Africa's economic growth and China's industrialization investment in Africa. It will like help Africa develop in the consumer markets as well.
Well, Heather Lee, thank you for those positive insights there, and thank you for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Thank you, Heather. Let's change gears now and focus on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which, according to the World Bank, has the potential to lift tens of millions of people out of poverty within the next 15 years. However, yet again, poor communication between member states and a lack of adequate transportation infrastructure between nations is seen as a major stumbling block affecting a successful takeoff. Add a pandemic and it becomes even more difficult. For more on this, I'm now being joined by trade governance and development specialist Ayo Aribidara. He joins me from Bunjul in Gambia. Ayo Aribidara, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. It's certainly a pleasure. At the start of last year, there was so much enthusiasm surrounding the implementation of the AfCFTA. Fast forward a year, not much has happened. What are some of the stumbling blocks that's preventing this hugely potentially lucrative block from taking off?
Thank you very much for the question. I think first of all, like most things around the world, COVID slowed down the progress on negotiations. And as you're aware, there have been negotiations on trading goods, trading services, as part of the phase one of negotiations. But aside having this substantive agreement, there are supposed to be other aspects such as agreeing on the schedule of tariffs, agreeing on the rules of origin, and this essentially involves country, presenting their tariff offers to, the Secretariat of the AfCFTA. But as you would have it, tariffs are basically customs issues, and as part of being customs issue, there are also fiscal policy issues. COVID has taken a huge toll on country finances, and losing this tax as part of liberalization is a big issue for most countries in Africa. So, but there has been some progress on this. For instance, from information I've gathered, about more than 87% of tariff lines have been agreed upon. So countries are making progress on this aspect, and they have, submitted this tariff schedule to the AfCFTA. So although trading officially started January 1st, 2021, real substantive trade hasn't been able to happen because these issues are still pending. So in line with finalizing the tariff schedules, there's also something called the tariff book, which the AfCFTA hopes to publish next year. So if these initiatives are put in place, it will actually help to improve on the momentum. COVID has been a major factor, like I mentioned earlier, as well as there are other complementary policies which are supposed to also be in place. For instance, the PAPs, which Afreximbank has just launched, which is supposed to, improve on the use of local currency in intra-African trade. So these are some of the issues and stumbling blocks which have affected, the momentum that was, I know everyone is aware that the AfCFTA had a lot of momentum as at 2020, early 2021. But hopefully in 2022, with some of these initiatives lined up, this momentum will resume, and hopefully we can have the Africa of our dreams that we desire and see trading properly take place under the AfCFTA. Thank you.
Absolutely, I agree with that sentiment there. Ayo Aribidara, a trading governance and development specialist at the AfCFTA. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your insights. Thank you, Ayo. In a few minutes, I'll be speaking with Marun Karuts, but before then, here's some company news for you. On Monday, the Hong Kong shares of Cathay Pacific Airways rose to its highest level in 2 months after the group posted losses for 2021 of £530 million. This is a significant improvement on losses posted a year earlier. Bosses have said the growth was driven by a strong demand for cargo and cost-cutting measures. Hong Kong has pursued a zero-COVID strategy in line with mainland Chinese policies and has suspended transit flights from most of the world. The airline said for this month it is operating about 2% of its pre-pandemic passenger capacity and around 20% of its pre-pandemic cargo capacity. Consumer goods giant Unilever is reportedly planning to axe 1,500 jobs as part of an overhaul of its management and structure. The cuts will form part of a shake-up intended to drive greater agility, improve category focus and strengthen accountability. The firm employs more than 150,000 people worldwide, including more than 6,000 people in the UK and Ireland. Details of where the Jobs Act will fall have not been set out. Microsoft has beat expectations in the latest quarter, with revenue and profit increasing by a fifth, amid robust demand for its services from companies and consumers. In the 3 months to the end of December, revenue climbed to $51.7 billion. Net income rose to $18.8 billion. Microsoft is valued at $2.2 trillion. The trading update comes a week after the tech giant agreed to buy games developer Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion. The World Economic Forum's virtual Davos Agenda Conference held last week with a focus on the global economic recovery of COVID-19. The group projects that the Middle East will expand by 4.1% this year, as the region is still trying to chart its own path in the context of geopolitical tensions. To facilitate this process, the World Economic Forum has convened the Regional Action Group for the Middle East and North Africa on a regular basis. This group consists of more than 60 ministers and CEOs from the region and works to enable policy coordination and exchange. Maroun Karoutz is the director of the Forum's Middle East and North Africa region, and he joined me for a discussion on the sidelines of last week's gathering. He joined me from Geneva. Maroun Karoutz, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. I do appreciate you taking out your time today. Can you please speak about some of the objectives of the Regional Action Group and its response to the COVID-19 pandemic recovery in the region?
Hello, good morning. The Regional Action Group was formed at the outset of the pandemic. If you recall, there was an almost universal breakdown in information flows at the moment. A lot of countries were turning, for good reason, inwards. And in the Middle East, this is even more underlined because it's one of the least integrated regions in the world. So what we did is bring together this group, this Regional Action Group, with more than 60 CEOs and ministers from across the region to make sure we close that gap and that businesses and the government are able to exchange insight and work together in tandem to inform the recovery. This is the principal objective. The secondary objective is to also bring the views from outside the region, for example, by hosting the Secretary of Commerce of the US, Mr. Mukesh Ambani, the CEO of Reliance, or other global leaders to help exchange insights on what the rest of the world is doing so that the region can also get inspiration from that.
Absolutely, it's so important and so crucial. I want to talk about geopolitical discourse. Our viewers know all too well that sometimes international discourse can be hijacked by the global north, and some of the reports can be quite skewed, particularly on the Middle East and North Africa. If it's not terrorism, it's something else. How is the forum and your office in particular trying to push forward progressive, positive geopolitical discourse that does involve not just regional players, but the international community as a whole?
The forum is an impartial organization, so that's a big advantage to us when we work in the Middle East. So we're one organization that is basically in dialogue with everyone. We've been in the region since the 70s. Actually, one of the first contributions the forum has had in the 70s is bridge the gap between the West and the Arab world after the oil embargo back then. So we have a long-standing history in the region. That's why we're a partner, a trusted partner for many countries there. And to give a concrete example of the work we're doing, since 2012, we've been convening a community of Palestinian and Israeli business leaders to advocate a two-state solution. And the way we work is to make sure that the economic incentives for peace are as prominent as possible.
Well, that's wonderful news, and I hope some of the work that you're doing gets projected more in the media. Maroon, we can't talk about economic progress and not talk about the climate emergency. Again, very similar to the sub-Saharan region. You contribute, well, the MENA region contributes so little, but pays such a major consequence. I believe that the MENA region is warming at 50% in comparison to the rest of the world. What kind of discussions are coming out this week to help the region tackle the effects of climate change?
Indeed, as you say, the region is one of the most affected by climate change. Just to illustrate one country as an example, Kuwait is projected to warm by 4.5 degrees by mid-century. So that makes a lot of the areas in the region unlivable if that were to happen. On the other hand, we're seeing renewed momentum for climate action in the region. The next two COP meetings in particular will be held in Egypt and the UAE respectively. So that's a big opportunity for the region to lead the agenda on climate change and to advocate for a just transition. We wanted the transition to be quick. We want it to be as efficient as possible, but it also has to be just in a sense that it does not scupper the hopes of many of the deprived or the refugees to access to energy, as one example. What the forum is doing in particular, we're supporting both Egypt and the UAE in their efforts to host the COP meetings. We've offered our support. And then we're convening later this year an action group on sustainability, which will bring together CEOs and government leaders from the region to make sure that this is a priority for policymakers there.
Absolutely. It sounds like a robust plan. Before I let you go, Maroon, what are some of the other major talking points that have come out from various dialogues this week?
So two come to mind in particular. One is a big worry for the region is the US-China dynamics. As you know, the US is still the region's biggest security partners, whereas China is increasingly the number one commercial or trade partner. So the words of President Xi, I'm sure, would have recommitting to the international multilateral system and to dialogue and highlighting the costs of confrontation would be comforting to many leaders in the region that we talk to. The second point is to re-emphasize what Dr. Fauci said earlier this week, that we are not in safe waters yet in terms of the pandemic becoming endemic, not until we are able to eradicate any likelihood of having more variants. And to do that, we need to make sure that there is vaccine equity, that there is no spot on this planet, no person on this planet that does not have access to vaccines. You can see the disparities in the MENA region. Gulf countries have vaccination rates above 70, 80%, whereas we have 10 of the poorest countries in our region who are still below 10% on vaccination rate. What that tells us is that no one will be safe until we are all safe. And it's an important message for making sure that everyone has access to vaccines.
Maroon Kairout, Director for Middle East North Africa at the World Economic Forum. Thank you so much for such wonderful insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure talking to you.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.